The dust from that departing wagon train had hardly settled when Emma Morgan knew in her gut she had been left behind. That morning sun was just beating down something fierce on the Colorado Territory, and there she stood, all alone next to her busted-up trunk, with tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her face. Why, just yesterday, she had been traveling west with her own aunt and uncle, heading for a brand new life out in California. Now they were just gone, having rolled out at the crack of dawn without her, while she was off gathering water from a little stream nearby. Emma's heart started to pound as the weight of it all began to sink right in. It was 1867, and getting left behind in the wild heart of the Colorado Territory was pretty much a death sentence for a 20-year-old woman out here all on her own. Her small fingers wrapped tight around the locket hanging around her neck, the last thing she had of her dear mother and father, both taken by the fever just 2 years before. "They could not have just forgotten me," she whispered to the empty air, even though everything she saw told a different story. Her Aunt Gertrude had never made a secret of how much she resented having to take in her own late sister's child, especially after Emma had turned down that marriage proposal. That awful deal Gertrude had tried to push on her back in St. Louis. Then the sound of hoofbeats getting closer pulled Emma right out of her misery. She spun around, throwing a hand up to shield her eyes from the blazing sun as she searched the horizon. A single rider came into view, his dark shape getting bigger and bigger as he rode in from the opposite direction of the wagons that left. Emma felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. A woman all by herself had plenty to worry about in these parts, especially when it came to strange men. Her eyes darted around, desperate for something she could use to protect herself, finally snatching up a thick branch that had fallen from a nearby cottonwood tree. The rider eased his horse to a slower walk as he got closer, and Emma could now make out that he was a tall fella, with broad shoulders and a face tanned by the sun, with a worn-out hat pulled down low, shadowing his eyes. He wore the plain, sturdy clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim pants, a faded shirt, and leather chaps that had seen plenty of hard miles. "Ma'am," he called out. His voice was deep, but it did not sound threatening as he tipped his hat. "Looks to me like you have been left in a real tough spot." Emma pulled her shoulders back, trying to look a whole lot braver than she felt inside. "I am doing just fine, sir. My people will be coming back for me directly." The cowboy swung down from his horse with an easy grace, but he kept a polite ways off. When he took off his hat, Emma saw that he had the most striking blue eyes, a real surprise against his sun-browned skin and sandy brown hair that curled up just a bit at the back of his neck. "The name is Noah Tanner, ma'am. I have been tracking that wagon train for the better part of a day, and I can tell you for a fact they are not turning back around. They crossed the river about 5 miles west of here, and they are making mighty fine time." Emma's brave face started to crumble a little. "That just cannot be true. My own aunt and uncle would not just up and leave me out here all alone." Noah's expression softened with a look of what looked like pity. It would not be the first time folks got left in the dust when slowing the party down was just not in the cards. "Was there some kind of trouble brewing between you and your family?" Emma just looked away, not wanting to speak the truth out loud to this complete stranger. Her aunt had made it plain as day that Emma's refusal to marry the very wealthy but truly awful Mr. Wilkerson back in St. Louis had been the straw that broke the camel's back. Now them leaving you here was no accident. "What I'm trying to say is, what's your name, ma'am?" Noah held back a moment, waiting for her to speak up. "It's Emma. Emma Morgan," she answered, still holding on tight to that piece of wood she was using as a weapon. "Well, Miss Morgan, the thing is, that wagon train is rolling right into some mighty dangerous country. We are talking Navajo and Apache territory, and they have been pretty riled up lately. Those folks will not risk turning this whole train around, not for one person, not even one of their own." Emma felt all the color just drain right out of her face as the hard truth of where she was truly started to sink in. There was no denying it now. "Then what am I supposed to do?" she asked, and she hated that little tremble she heard in her own voice. Noah took a slow look at the few things she had, all scattered there in the dust. A trunk with a busted latch, a little carpet bag, and a pretty bonnet in it that was now just laying in the dirt. His eyes came back to rest on Emma's face, seeing her plain calico dress, and that stubborn look she had, even with all that fear swimming in her eyes. "You are coming with me," he said plain and simple. "Pibui is a 3-day ride from here. I can get you there safe and sound. From there, you can figure out what you want to do next. Emma's back went ramrod straight. Sir, I could not possibly travel unchaperoned with a man I have only just met. That would be highly improper. The corner of Noah's mouth hitched up just a bit. In a real tight spot, ma'am. And I mean this with all due respect. Your options are looking mighty slim. You can ride with me to PBLO, or you can take your chances out here and hope another soul wanders by before the coyotes, or something meaner finds you after the sun goes down. And right on cue, as if to prove his point, a long howl drifted across the wide open prairie. Emma couldn't help but take a step closer to the cowboy before she stopped herself short. How do I even know I can trust you? She asked, lifting her chin a bit. You don't, Noah said, plain and simple. But I give you my word as a man that I will see you safely to town, and not a single hair on your head will be touched by me or anyone else while you're under my watch. Emma thought about her choices, which, just as he'd pointed out, were getting slimmer by the minute. The sun was going to be down in just a couple of hours, and the very idea of spending the night all alone out in this wilderness made her blood run ice cold. All right then, Mr. Tanner, she finally said, her mind made up. I'll take you up on your offer to get me to PBLO. Noah gave a single firm nod. Smart move. He walked over to her trunk. All right, what in here can't you live without? My horse, she can't haul all this stuff, plus the two of us to boot. Emma moved fast going through her things. She picked out a fresh set of clothes, her mama's old Bible, and a couple of little keepsakes. Everything else, mostly them fancy dresses and silly shoes her aunt made her pack, well, they'd have to stay right where they were. I'm all set, she said, after stuffing everything into her smaller traveling bag. Noah tied her bag right onto his saddle and then looked at her. You ever ridden astride before, ma'am? Emma's cheeks turned pink. Why, of course not. A lady rides side saddle. Well, not out in this country, they don't, Noah said back. Not if they're aiming to stay on the horse when trouble comes knocking. Before Emma could even get a word out, Noah had scooped her right up and set her on his horse, easy as you please. She let out a little gasp at him touching her like that, and then another one when she found herself sitting on that big horse like a wing in her dress and all. Well, this is just not proper at all, she mumbled, trying her best to pull her skirts down to keep herself decent. This here's about surviving, Noah shot back, swinging up behind her like he'd done it 1,000 times. His arms wrapped right around her to grab the reins, making a steady circle around her that Emma felt was both a little scary and strangely safe. Hold on tight, he told her. And just like that, they were off and running, leaving behind the last reminders of the life she once knew. As they rode on, Emma couldn't help but notice the man sitting right behind her, the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back. She could feel the solid strength in his arms as he guided the horse, and she caught the simple scent of leather and pine that seemed to follow him. Have you been out in these parts for very long, Mr. Tanner? She asked, trying to take her mind off of just how close they were sitting together. Please call me Noah, he replied. And yes, ma'am, going on 10 years now. I headed west right after the war was over. You were in the war? Emma asked, her curiosity getting the best of her. Rode with the Union cavalry, he said plainly. Saw enough fighting to last a man a whole lifetime. Emma just nodded, understanding completely why he didn't want to say much more. So what is it you do now? A little of this and that. I drive cattle most of the time, do some scouting for the army whenever they have a need for it, and do some hunting and trapping come wintertime. Well, you are a man of many talents, Emma remarked. Noah let out a soft chuckle and the sound rumbled right through his chest and into her back. Jack of all trades, but a master of none, just as my old man used to say. They both fell into a comfortable silence as the horse kept up a steady pace heading on west. Well, now Emma had never been this close to a man in her life. Not like this anyway, and she found herself feeling both terribly improper and mighty curious about the forced nearness of it all. As that big old sun started to dip low, Noah guided their horse on over to a small patch of trees not far from a trickling creek. Reckon we'll make camp here for the night, he said, swinging down from the saddle with an easy grace before reaching up to help Emma down from the horse. Her poor legs were stiff as a board and sore from that long ride, and she nearly buckled a bit as her boots finally touched the solid ground. Noah's strong hands were there in a flash to steady her, and they seemed to linger just a moment longer than was strictly proper, before he finally let her go and turned to get the saddle off that tired horse. "Can I help you with anything?" Mama asked, feeling a bit useless as Noah went about setting up their camp for the night. "You could rustle up some kindling for our fire," he suggested, nodding his head toward the edge of the trees. Emma got right to her task, thankful she had something helpful to do. As she gathered up the small branches, she couldn't help but think about her predicament. By every rule she had ever been taught, she was ruined beyond all hope, out here spending the night all alone with a man she barely knew. Met. But what other choice did she have? Her own aunt and uncle had just abandoned her, leaving her to perish out in this wild country. This stranger, this Noah Tanner, he had offered her safety when he just as well could have ridden right on by or done something much worse. Perhaps the old rules of polite society did not mean much out in this wild land after all. When she came back with her arms full of dry sticks, Noah had already laid out 2 bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire pit he had dug. "I appreciate it," he said, taking the sticks from her and arranging them like he had done it 100 times. In just a few minutes, he had a small fire crackling and dancing in the dark. "Are you hungry?" he asked, reaching into his saddlebags. Emma nodded her head, realizing all at once that she had not eaten a thing since sunrise. Noah handed her a piece of dried beef and a hard biscuit that had surely seen better days. "It is not much," he said with a hint of apology, "but it will keep your strength up. We will have a proper meal once we make it to Pueblo." "It is more than enough," Emma assured him, even though the tough, salty meat was unlike anything she had ever eaten before. "Thank you kindly for sharing what you have." They ate in a comfortable silence. The soft crackle of the fire and the faraway calls of night animals were the only sounds in the whole wide world. After they finished their meal, Noah handed her a canteen full of water. "You best get some rest," he advised her. "We have got a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." Emma settled down onto the bedroll he had laid out for her, pulling a rough wool blanket up around her shoulders against the chilly night air. Across the campfire, Noah leaned back against his saddle, his hat pulled down low over his eyes, but she could just tell he was not sleeping. "Are you going to rest at all?" she asked in a soft voice. "Later on," he replied. "I need to keep watch for a little while." Emma wanted to ask what kind of dangers might be hiding out there in the darkness, but she decided she would probably rather not know. Instead, she said, "Thank you, Mr. Tanner, for helping me out today." He lifted his hat just a little to look over at her, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his handsome face. "Go on and get some sleep, Emma. The sun comes up mighty early out here." Despite being bone-tired, sleep would not come for Emma as she just stared up at the big star-filled sky. Never before had she felt so completely helpless, and yet there was a strange sort of excitement in facing the great unknown with only this mysterious cowboy there to watch over her. After a while, the steady, quiet sounds of the night and her own deep exhaustion finally won out. Worry, and she finally fell into a restless sleep. Emma woke up to the smell of strong coffee. When she opened her eyes, she saw Noah hunkered down by a little morning fire, pouring that dark, hot coffee into a tin cup. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the eastern sky in soft shades of pink and gold. "Morning, Sitich," he said softly. "Care for some coffee?" Emma sat herself up, brushing her tangled hair out of her face. Lord, she thought, I must look a sight. She realized she had slept in her clothes and had no way at all to clean herself up. "Yes, please," she answered, taking the cup he held out to her. The coffee was strong and a little bitter, but the warmth felt mighty good in the morning chill. "Did you get any sleep at all?" she asked, seeing the dark circles under his eyes. "Enough," Noah said, but she had a feeling that was not the whole truth. "We ought to get moving soon. I am aiming to make it to the Vasquez crossing before the sun goes down." Emma just nodded and sipped her coffee. "How much further is it to Pueblo?" "Another 2 days, if this weather holds and we do not run into any trouble." The easy way he talked about trouble sent a cold chill right down Emma's spine. "What sort of trouble are you talking about?" Noah's face got real serious then. "Fights over land between the settlers and the native tribes have been getting pretty serious. The army's been moving the tribes onto reservations, and well, not all of them are going quietly. And then you've got your regular outlaws just looking to hold up folks on the trail. That is concerning, Emma said, trying her best to keep her voice from shaking. Now, don't you worry, Noah told her, a small smile on his face. I know this country like the back of my own hand, and I'll make sure to steer us clear of any trouble. They broke camp in a hurry right after that, with Noah packing everything up like he'd done it 1,000 times. While Emma did what she could to make herself look decent with what little she had to work with, she was able to braid her hair again and wash her face with just a little water from the canteen. But she couldn't help but feel dusty and all kinds of rumpled. Just like before, Noah lifted her right up onto his horse, then swung himself up behind her. Emma was a little surprised to find that the whole thing felt almost comfortable to say, her body a whole lot less tense as they started out across the wide open land. As they rode on, Noah started pointing out different landmarks and sharing stories from his days out in the territory. Emma found herself listening intently. She was just captivated by his stories of survival and all the adventure, so different from the quiet, sheltered life she had always known back in St. Louis. "So how did you end up traveling west with your aunt and uncle?" Noah asked while they took a short break to water the horse down at a little creek. Emma paused for a moment, then figured there was little use in hiding the truth. "After my folks passed on from the fever, I had nowhere else in the world to go. My Aunt Gertrude, my mother's sister, she took me in, but she made it real clear I was a burden. When my Uncle Frederick decided he was going to seek his fortune out in California, I was brought along mostly because my Aunt Gertrude needed some help with all the cooking and the washing. And they just left you behind." There was a sharp edge of anger in Noah's voice. Just like that, Emma nodded, blinking hard to fight back the sudden tears in her eyes. "I suspect it was not an accident. The night before, I overheard them talking about how I had been nothing but trouble since St. Louis, refusing the marriage they had arranged for me with a man 3 times my age." Noah's jaw tightened. "Some people just do not deserve to be called family." "Well, perhaps it is for the best," Emma said, surprising herself with how true it felt. "I was never going to have the life I wanted with them." "And what kind of life is it that you want?" Noah asked Emma Morgan, his blue eyes studying her with a real, honest curiosity. That question took her by complete surprise. Not a single person had ever asked her what she wanted before. "I'm not entirely sure," she said, her voice soft. "Something more than just being someone's wife, or someone's burden, I suppose. I would like to be useful, to make my own way somehow." Noah nodded, thinking on her words for a moment. Pueblo is growing mighty fast these days. There might be opportunities there for a woman with some grit. "I surely hope so," Emma replied. "I have very little money and even fewer prospects, but I am willing to work hard." "That counts for a whole lot out here," Noah said, as he helped her back up onto the horse. "The West does not care much about where you happen to come from. It only cares about what you can do." They continued on their journey through the long afternoon, and the landscape gradually began to change as they pushed westward. The flat plains started to give way to more varied country, with large rocky outcroppings and much deeper ravines. Noah explained that they were following the Arkansas River, though often at a distance to stay clear of the rougher parts of the trail. As that sun started to dip, Emma felt Noah getting mighty watchful. His eyes were just a sweeping back and forth, taking in everything on the horizon. He'd gone stiff as a board right behind her, and she could feel him on edge like it was a summer heat. "Is something the matter?" she finally whispered. "Likely nothing," he said back, but his voice told a different story. "I saw some dust kicking up about a mile back. Might just be some folks following our trail." Emma asked, a little bit of fear crawling into her voice. "Can't say for certain, but we're going to take a different path just to be on the safe side." Noah steered their horse down into a tight ravine, following what looked to be an old animal path. The high rock walls on both sides of them gave them some cover, but Emma could not shake the feeling of being penned in that narrow spot. They rode on with not a word between them for nearly an hour before coming out onto open land once more. Noah right away pointed them toward a thick patch of trees off in the distance. "We'll bed down over there tonight," he told her. "It ain't the Vasquez crossing I was aiming for, but it will have to do." By the time they finally made it to the trees, the dark was coming on fast. Helped Emma get down from the horse. Then right away he unsaddled the animal, working with a practiced kind of quickness in the fading daylight. "We ain't making a fire tonight," he told her in a low voice, laying out their bedrolls a little bit closer together than they were the night before. Emma just nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Someone could really be trailing them, and a campfire would just be a big sign announcing their location. The very thought sent a shiver right through her that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. "Here now," Noah said, handing her another piece of dried meat and a strip of dried apple. "I know it ain't much of a supper, but it is quiet." They ate in silence, just listening to the night sounds all around them. When they finished, Noah checked his revolver before he tucked it right back into its holster. "Try and get some sleep," he told Emma. "I'll keep the watch." "You can't stay awake forever, you know," she protested. "You need to get your rest, too." "I will wake you if I need to shut my eyes," he promised her. "Now go on and sleep. Tomorrow is likely to be a long day." Emma laid down, pulling the blanket up tight around her shoulders. Even though she was bone-tired, sleep felt impossible with the knowledge that danger was so close, was hiding nearby. She kept her eyes on Noah as he leaned his back against a thick tree trunk, his outline just a dark shape in the pitch-black night. "Noah," she called out real soft after a minute, "who in the world do you reckon is following us?" He stayed quiet for so long she figured he was not going to answer. Finally, he let out a long breath. "Could be nothing at all. Or it could be some of Barlow's boys. They have been hitting homesteads and taking what they can from travelers on the trail between here and Pueblo." "Outlaws," Emma said, her voice shaking just a little. "Yes, but they usually set their sights on bigger groups, folks with a lot more to lose. One man and a woman might not be worth the trouble for them to follow." That "might not" did almost nothing to calm Emma down. She pulled the wool blanket even tighter around her shoulders. "I am not going to let anything happen to you," Noah said, his voice low and steady, like he could feel her fear. "I gave you my word." And for some reason, Emma believed him. Even though she had only known this man for a little more than a day, she found herself trusting him with her very life. Maybe it was because she had to, or maybe there was just something you could plain count on about Noah Tanner, with that straight-ahead look in his eyes and the quiet way he just got things done. "Thank you," she whispered back. Before long, exhaustion finally took over, finally calmed her nerves, and Emma drifted into a restless kind of sleep. Her dreams were a mess, all filled up with chasing shadows and the pounding sound of horse hooves. She stirred once in the night to find Noah still keeping watch, his eyes catching the slivers of moonlight that cut through the trees. Their eyes met for a heartbeat before she fell back into her uneasy sleep. When Emma opened her eyes again, the first gray light of morning was creeping through the woods. Noah was crouched down beside her, a hand gently shaking her shoulder. "We have to move," Whitey said, his voice quiet but tense. "Now." Emma sat bolt upright, wide awake at the urgency she heard in his voice. "What is it? Is it riders?" "4, maybe 5, coming this way." Fear took a cold hold of Emma's throat, and she scrambled to her feet. Noah was already rolling up their blankets with quick, sure movements. "How close are they?" she asked, helping him pack. "Too close. Get on." In just a few minutes, they were on the move, slipping through the trees as quietly as they could. Noah was leading the horse on foot to keep the noise down. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as they picked their way through the thick underbrush. Every single cracking twig sounded just like a gunshot going off right next to her ear. When they finally reached the edge of the tree line, Noah pulled up, surveying the open ground ahead of them. In the early morning light, Emma could see a vast, rolling prairie stretching out before them, with rocky hills rising up way in the distance. "We are going to have to make a run for those hills," Noah said, pointing with his chin. "There's a canyon over there. I reckon we can lose them in it if we get a little lucky." "And if our luck runs out?" Emma could not help but ask. Noah's face was grim as he climbed up on the horse behind her. "Then we fight. You just hold on tight." With that said, he spurred the horse forward, and they burst out from the cover of the trees at a dead run. Emma gripped the saddle horn for dear life, her body moving on pure instinct with the rhythm of the horse as they thundered across the open prairie. They had made it maybe halfway across the distance to the hills when a shout rang out from behind them, followed by the all-too-familiar crack of a rifle. Noah muttered a curse and urged the horse to run even faster. "Keep your head down! Down! He hollered over the howl of the wind and the thunder of hoofbeats. Emma hugged herself down tighter against the horse's neck, pure fear making her heart pound. Another gunshot cracked the air, this one much closer, kicking up a spray of dirt just a few yards to their right. Noah suddenly yanked the reins, pulling them hard toward a shallow gully that Emma hadn't even laid eyes on before. The horse nearly slid all the way down the bank, almost throwing them both clear off before it found its footing again and kept on running for its life along the bottom of that gully. More shots rang out from behind them, but that deep cut in the earth gave them a little bit of cover from the men chasing them. Emma risked a quick peek back and saw 4 riders perched at the top of the gully, their horses bucking and rearing as the men shot down at them. "We're almost there," Noah called out, and Emma turned to see the gully was widening right into the mouth of a much bigger canyon just up ahead. The second they burst out into that canyon, Noah steered the horse sharp to the right, following what looked to be a dry creek bed that snaked between towering walls of rock. The horse was breathing hard now, tired from the long gallop, but it still did what it was asked, and followed Noah's lead without a fuss. The hollering behind them started to fade as they twisted through the increasingly tricky maze of passages deep inside the canyon. At last, Noah pulled back on the reins, guiding the horse down a tight little side canyon that came to a dead end, a small box canyon with steep rock walls on 3 sides. "They'll have a heck of a time finding us here," he said, swinging off the horse and helping Emma down. "And even if they do, there is only one way in, which makes them easier to handle." Emma's own legs felt like jelly when her boots hit the ground, the sheer adrenaline and fear making her wobbly. "Who are those men? Why in the world are they chasing us?" Noah led the worn-out horse to the very back of the little canyon, where a small spring offered just a trickle of water. "Barlow's men, I reckon. As for the reason," he hesitated for a moment, "I've had dealings with them before. I testified against 2 of their crew last year up in Denver. Got them sent to the gallows." Emma just stared at him. "So they are after you, not me." "Most likely." Noah's expression was filled with regret. "I am so sorry, Emma. I never dreamed they would come this far south. I never would have put you in this kind of danger if I had known." "You could not have known," Emma replied, surprised by the firmness in her own voice, "without a hint of blame. And here you are, risking your own neck to protect me. I can't rightly blame you for having some enemies." Noah's tight expression eased up just a little. "You're taking this a whole lot better than most folks would." "What other choice do I have?" Emma shot back, plain and simple. "Besides, I'm starting to reckon that life out in these territories just calls for a certain kind of bend-don't-break attitude." The slightest hint of a smile crossed Noah's lips. "That it surely does." He moved over to the mouth of the box canyon, taking a careful peek around the edge. "I do not hear them anymore, but you can bet they are still out there searching. We had best stay put until it gets dark." Emma nodded, finding a seat on a flat rock up against the canyon wall. The morning sun had not quite found its way into their hiding spot, and she gave a little shiver in the cool air. "Here now," Noah said, seeing her shiver. He slipped right out of his leather jacket and handed it over to her. "Won't you be cold?" Emma asked, even while she was gratefully pulling on the coat. "I am used to it," he answered with a shrug. Emma put on the jacket, and it nearly swallowed her whole. She was so much smaller. It smelled of leather, horse, and the wild outdoors. Had a scent she couldn't quite name, but she knew it was Noah's. The warmth from the fabric, still holding his own body heat, was a strange kind of comfort. They settled into a tense, watchful quiet. Noah kept a sharp eye on the entrance to their little hideaway, while Emma took care of the horse, giving it a few sips of the precious water they had left in their canteen. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, the air inside the box canyon started to get mighty hot and still. Emma finally took the jacket off, folding it up real careful and setting it down on a flat rock. "Tell me about yourself before you came to the territories," she said, finally breaking that long, heavy silence. "You mentioned you were in the war." Noah had been busy cleaning his revolver, and he looked up, a little bit surprised by her question. He thought for a second, then he nodded. "Not much of a story. Grew up on a small family farm in Ohio. I joined up in 1862, soon as I turned 18. Fought with the 6th Ohio Cavalry all the way to Appomattox." "And after?" Emma pushed gently when he got quiet again. Noah's hands went back to the familiar task of cleaning his weapon. I went home, found out my parents had both died from typhoid fever while I was gone. The farm was taken by the bank. I did not have much reason to stick around Ohio after that, so I just headed on out west. The plain, sad truth of his story really hit Emma right in the heart. "I'm so sorry about your folks," she said, her voice real soft. "Seems like we might have that in common," Noah nodded, taking in her words. "What about you before you came to St. Louis?" "Well, you saw," Emma smiled just a little, thinking back. "We lived up in Boston. My daddy was a professor, taught literature at the university up there. And my mother, she taught me right there at home, literature, mathematics, and even a little Latin. They had some forward-thinking ideas about schooling for young women." "Well, that explains why you talk so proper," Noah pointed out with a little grin. Emma let out a soft little laugh. "My aunt was always just horrified by my bookish ways, as she liked to call them. She figured a woman only needed just enough schooling to read her Bible and take care of the household books." "Your aunt sounds like a plain old fool," Noah said, not mincing words. "Being smart is a gift, not something to ever be ashamed of." His words warmed Emma clean through, more than the sun pouring in. Their little hideout. Not many men in her experience had ever put much stock in a woman's way of thinking. They kept on talking like that, off and on for the rest of the day, swapping stories about where they'd come from and what they'd been through, just killing time till sundown. Emma found out that Noah had a little sister who'd gone and married a fella and moved out to Oregon way before the trouble started, and he hadn't laid eyes on her since. And Noah, well, he listened real close, as Emma told him all about her dreams of maybe becoming a schoolteacher or even a writer one of these days. When the sun started dipping low, throwing long shadows across their little spot, Noah got real watchful again, his mind turning back to the business they had to finish. "All right now, we'll wait till it's pitch black," he said, checking his pistol one last time before sliding it back in its holster. "Then we'll try to sneak right on by him and keep heading for Pueblo. It's a gamble for sure, but sitting tight here ain't gonna work. We're out in the open and we're getting mighty low on water." Emma just nodded, swallowing down that fear that was trying to rise up in her again. "What do you need me to do to help?" "You stick right by my side and do precisely what I tell you. No questions asked," Noah answered back, his face as serious as a heart attack. "Now listen, if they manage to get me, you take this horse and you ride for Pueblo like the devil himself is chasing you. Follow that big North Star, but keep it just a little off to your right side. You ought to make it to town in about a day's time. If you just keep going, ain't nothing bad gonna happen to you," Emma said, her voice as firm as solid oak, not even letting her mind wander to that awful possibility. A quick, honest-to-goodness smile crossed Noah's face. "Well now, Miss Morgan, I surely do admire your grit." As the last bit of daylight faded, they got ready to leave their little hidey hole. Noah saddled up the horse, which had been resting easy all through the long day, while Emma gathered up their few meager supplies. When they were all set, Noah gave her a hand up onto the saddle before he swung up right behind her. "Now remember," he breathed, his voice low against her ear. "Quiet as a church mouse." They eased out real careful from that little box canyon and picked their way through the twisting, turning paths of the much bigger canyon. That little sliver of a moon in the sky gave them just enough light to see their way, though it seemed Noah was counting more on old memories and a good gut feeling than his own two eyes to guide them. Through all that darkness, every nerve in Emma's body was pulled tight with worry. Each little click of the horse's hooves hitting the stone echoed like a gunshot in her ears, and every dark shadow looked like it was holding a threat, a waiting enemy. Noah's steady presence behind her was the only thing holding her steady against the rising wave of fear. They had almost reached the opening of the canyon when a single gunshot shattered the deep silence. The bullet glanced off a rock just to their left. Noah wasted no time and urged the horse into a full gallop, trading being quiet for being fast. "Hold on tight," he commanded as they burst from the canyon out into the open country. More shots rang out, along with the sound of angry shouts and the thunder of pursuing hoofbeats coming up from behind. Noah kept the horse at a dead run, weaving a zigzag path across the moonlit prairie to make them a much more difficult target to hit. Emma held on tight to the saddle horn, her body moving with every one of the horse's powerful strides. The cold night wind whipped tears from her eyes as they flew across the vast landscape, and the sounds of the chase slowly began to fade away behind them. For almost a full hour, Noah pushed the horse hard before he finally slowed down to a more manageable pace. He listened carefully for several long minutes before he spoke. "I reckon we have lost them for now," he said, his breath warm against the back of Emma's neck. "But we had better keep moving. Pueblo is still a full day's ride from here, I reckon." They pushed on, straight through the night. They only stopped for a moment here and there to rest their horse. Noah kept his eyes peeled the whole time, always glancing back over his shoulder for any sign that someone was on their trail. Emma, just worn slick out, found herself fading in and out, held steady only by Noah's strong arms around her. Dawn broke just as they were crossing a shallow river. The horse picked its way, real careful-like, across the slick rocks on the bottom. On the other side, Noah finally called for a stop. They were finally taking a break. "We both need some rest," he said, helping Emma down. Her legs just gave out on her the second they touched the ground, but Noah caught her right before she could take a tumble. "Whoa there now, I've got you." Emma was just too dog-tired to feel a bit of shame about her weakness, or the way Noah's arms were wrapped around her waist to keep her standing. "Just need a minute," she mumbled, though Lord knows she felt like she could sleep for a whole week. Noah helped her get settled under a big cottonwood tree. He quickly unsaddled their horse and let it get a good long drink from the river. When he walked back over, he carried what was left of their food. It was just a few strips of jerky and the last handful of the dried apples. "Eat," he said softly, handing Emma her portion. "We'll rest for 2 hours, not a minute more, then we push on to Pueblo." Emma wanted to argue that 2 hours was nowhere near enough, but the deep worry lines carved into Noah's face made her hold her tongue. He was doing every single thing in his power to keep the two of them alive. The very least she could do was go along with his plan without a single complaint. They ate without a word, the small meal doing little to quiet the gnawing hunger in Emma's belly, but it provided just enough strength to keep going. When they had finished, Noah settled down beside her against the tree trunk, their shoulders gently touching. "Get some sleep," he told her. "I'll wake you when it is time to move." "You need some rest too," Emma protested through a big yawn. "I will close my eyes for a little bit," Noah promised, though she doubted he would get any real sleep. Despite her firm decision to stay awake and make sure Noah got some rest as well, Emma was overcome by pure exhaustion within just a few minutes. She drifted off into a deep, dreamless sleep and was only faintly aware at some point of her head coming to rest on Noah's strong shoulder. When she finally woke up, the sun was already a good deal higher in the sky. She woke with a start and realized her head was still resting right there on Noah's shoulder. And to make matters worse, his arm had somehow found its way around her while they were asleep, holding her snug and safe against his side. Emma shot right up, her face turning red as a summer tomato with pure embarrassment. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry about that." "It's all right," Noah cut in gently, his own face looking a little sheepish as he pulled his arm back. "We both needed the rest," he said, glancing up at the sun. "Looks like we've slept a bit longer than I planned. We ought to get a move on." They got ready to leave in a hurry, both of them carefully avoiding looking each other in the eye as they worked. Emma just couldn't help but wonder what in the world Noah was thinking of her now. After all, respectable women did not just fall asleep on the shoulders of men they hardly knew, no matter how tough the situation was. But still, as Noah helped her up onto the horse, his hands were as kind and respectful as they had ever been. And when he settled in behind her, there was not a hint of anything improper in the way he took hold of the reins. "Pueblo is about an 8-hour ride from here, if we really push it," he told her as they set off. "We ought to make it there by nightfall." The long day stretched out before them, hot and kicking up dust as they rode hard across the open country. Noah kept the horse at a steady, fast pace, clearly in a hurry to reach the safety of town before the men chasing them could catch up. They did not talk much, saving all their energy for the journey. As the afternoon sun began to sink, Emma started to see the first welcome signs of civilization. Some fenced-off fields in the distance, and a weathered old signpost pointing the way toward Pueblo, and even some wagon tracks in the dry dirt. Her spirits finally lifted at these little signs that their terrible ordeal might finally be coming to an end. Then, just as the faint shapes of the buildings of Pueblo came into view on the horizon, Noah suddenly pulled the horse to a sharp halt. "Riders," he said flatly, coming in fast from the south. Emma's heart sank in her chest as she squinted, trying to see where he was looking. And sure enough, a plume of dust on the horizon marked the approach of several horsemen, and they were moving quickly to block their path into town. "It is them, is it not?" she asked, her voice trembling, even though she already knew the answer. Noah's jaw tightened as he quickly sized up the situation. "It is, and they have managed to cut us off from the main road into town. What are we going to do?" Noah pointed toward a line of trees that followed a dry creek bed just to their right. "All right, we'll make a run for those trees, then we'll follow the creek on toward town. It is a longer way, but it should give us some cover." They took off at a full gallop, and that tired old horse dug deep and answered Noah's call. Behind them, the riders in the distance changed their course, seeing as how they'd spotted their prey. The trees looked like they were a million miles away as they raced across that wide-open ground. The men chasing them were gaining on them with every single minute that went by. Emma found herself praying like she had never prayed in her entire life, just begging God for a little bit more speed, a little more precious time. They were just yards away from the line of trees when the first bullets started to whistle right past them. Noah cursed under his breath and leaned down lower over the horse, pushing it to a final, desperate burst of speed that finally carried them into the welcome safety of the woods. The creek bank gave them a natural trench, and they followed it at a dangerous pace, the horse slipping and scrambling its way along the slick, muddy ground. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers crashing into the trees, whilst hollering back and forth to each other as they tried to keep on their trail in that tight, crowded space. "We are almost to town," Noah said with encouragement, just as they came around a bend in the creek and laid eyes on the first buildings. Pueblo was just up ahead, but their horse, plum-tuckered out from days of hard riding, was starting to falter. Its gait got all uneven, and its breathing came in ragged gasps. Noah, not wanting to, eased back on the reins, knowing full well that pushing the poor animal to collapse would spell the end for both of them. The sounds of riders behind them grew louder as their own pace slowed to a crawl. Emma risked a look over her shoulder and saw two riders breaking out from the trees behind them, closing in fast on their tired old horse. "Noah," she said, her voice tight, pointing back. He followed her gaze and made up his mind in a heartbeat. "When I give the word, you jump and roll off the horse to the right and stay down," he ordered, pulling his revolver. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. You trust me." Emma gave a firm nod, readying herself for his signal. They had just come to a bend in the creek where a big fallen tree offered some natural cover. As they got near it, Noah shouted, "Now!" Emma let go of the saddle horn and threw herself sideways, hitting the ground hard and rolling just like he told her. The impact knocked the wind clean out of her lungs, but she managed to scramble behind the fallen tree, which was clearly what Noah had wanted all along. Noah slid off his horse with a practiced ease, landed steady, and gave his horse a good slap on the rump. The horse bolted ahead, a clever distraction, while Noah scrambled to join Emma behind that old fallen log. He got down right beside her, his trusty six-shooter feeling heavy and ready in his hand as the riders rounded the bend in the trail. "Keep your head low now," he whispered, just as the first of them rascals came into view. The fella saw them all right and started to raise his long rifle, but Noah, bless his heart, was quicker on the draw. His pistol barked twice, sharp and loud, and that rider just folded, tumbling from his saddle with a pained yelp. The other man yanked back on his reins, real sharp-like, seeing his partner hit the dust. He started bringing his own iron around to answer back. Emma hugged the dirt, trying to make herself as small as a field mouse, while splinters of wood rained down just above her head. But Noah, he was calm as a Sunday morning, returning fire, making every single shot count. After a trade of shots that felt like it stretched on for an eternity, but really it was probably just a few heartbeats, that second rider went down too. And then, a deafening quiet fell over the trail. All Emma could hear was the frantic drumming of her own heart and the steady, calm breathing of Noah right there beside her. Then off in the distance, she heard a most welcome sound in the world. Hoofbeats, getting fainter by the second. It seemed the rest of the posse had decided that this particular chase just was not worth the price of admission. "Are they gone for good?" Emma whispered, her voice barely a breath. After a few long, quiet minutes ticked by, Noah carefully eased his head up to take a peek over their makeshift cover. Reckon so. The two I got are still down for the count, and I do not see or hear a thing from the others. He got to his feet real slow, that revolver still held at the ready. You stay put while I go check things out. Emma held her breath, watching as Noah walked up to the men on the ground. He checked on each one just for a moment before coming back to her side. Are they gone? She asked in a low voice. Noah gave a grim nod. They did not leave us a whole lot of choice in the matter. He put his pistol away and offered a hand to help Emma up. Are you hurt at all? That was a mighty hard fall you took back there. Now that the shooting had stopped and the danger was gone, Emma started to feel all the different aches and pains setting in. A raw scrape on her elbow, a deep bruise on her hip, and what she knew for sure would be some impressive black and blue marks all down her right side. But it did not feel like anything was broken. I'm all right, she told him, trying to sound brave. What about our horse? Long gone, I expect, Noah answered. But we are not too far from town now. We can walk the rest of the way. Emma just nodded, and they started walking along the dry creek bed toward Pueblo, both of them keeping their eyes peeled for any sign of the rest of those fellas. After about a half hour of trudging along, they finally broke through the trees onto a real dirt road that led right into town. The sun was dipping low as they at last came upon the edge of Pueblo. Emma reckoned she had never seen a more welcome sight than that dusty main street with its wooden buildings and the warm glow of oil lamps being lit against the coming night. Folks just stopped and stared as they passed, a woman looking worse for wear in a torn and filthy dress, walking next to a hard-faced cowboy with a pistol on his hip, who looked like he was ready for a fight. Noah paid those stares no mind, leading Emma straight to a two-story building with a sign that read, Pueblo Hotel. Inside, a balding fellow looked up from his desk, his eyebrows raised high at the state they were in. Before he could get a word out, Noah placed a few coins right on the counter. 2 rooms, if you please, he said with a firm voice, and I need to know where we might be able to find the sheriff. The clerk's whole attitude suddenly became a lot more respectful at the sight of that money. The sheriff's office is 2 doors down, he said, pushing a guest book toward Noah. Now, about the rooms, I've only got one left up on the 2nd floor. Been mighty busy with all the cattle buyers in town. Noah's brow furrowed. The lady here needs a proper room. It is quite all right, Emma interjected, touching Noah's arm. After what we've been through, a roof of any kind will suffice. Noah looked at her for a moment, then nodded. 1 room, then he told the clerk, signing the register. The clerk handed over a key. Room 6, top of the stairs, end of the hall. There's a bathing room at the end of the hall that the lady might appreciate, he added with a pointed glance at their trail-worn appearance. Thank you, Emma said sincerely, the thought of a real bath almost bringing tears to her eyes. I need to speak with the sheriff about Barlow's men, Noah told her as they climbed the stairs. Will you be all right alone for a while? Emma nodded. I'll be fine. A bath and sleep are all I need. The room when Noah unlocked the door was simple but clean. A bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small ottoman with a lamp, and a cushioned chair by the window. To Emma, it looked like absolute luxury. I'll return as soon as I can, Noah promised, lingering in the doorway. Lock the door behind me. After he left, Emma secured the door as instructed, and then sank onto the edge of the bed. She was just plumb worn out. For a good long while, she just sat there. She was trying to make heads or tails of it all, everything that had happened these last 3 days. Her own kin had left her high and dry. Then a stranger came along and saved her. He'd become her guardian, with outlaws hot on their heels, taking shots at them. She had to run for her very life. Now back where she came from, by all accounts, her reputation was ruined for good. She'd spent 3 nights with a man, all alone. But here she was, still breathing, and mostly in one piece, right here in Pueblo, Colorado. With a long, heavy sigh, Emma finally decided it was time to get a move on. She gathered up the few clean clothes she'd managed to salvage from her bag. Then she went looking for the bathing room. She was just dreaming of some hot water. Well, it turns out this hotel actually kept a boiler fired up for the folks staying there. That simple luxury was almost too much to handle. Emma scrubbed off layers of trail dust and sweat, She washed away all the fear right along with it. She scrubbed her hair clean and finally felt like a person again for the first time, ever since that wagon train left her in the dust. When she walked back to the room, she was dressed in the last clean dress she owned in the world. Her hair was still a little damp, but she'd braided it up nice and neat. She found Noah waiting for her right in the hallway just outside their door. He said, I was starting to get a little worried. His eyes looked her over, seeing how much better and more rested she looked. That bath was just too wonderful to rush, Emma explained, even managing a small smile. Did you get to speak with the sheriff? Noah gave a nod and followed her on into the room after she got the door unlocked. He's sending some men out to go and collect those fellas. He says he's been hunting Barlow's gang for a good few months, and he's mighty grateful for any help in finding out their numbers. Are you going to get in any trouble for what you did? Emma asked, her voice full of concern. No, ma'am. It was self-defense, plain and simple. Those were wanted men with a price on their heads, as a matter of fact. Noah then reached down into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch that made a clinking sound as he set it down on the table. Which reminds me, this here is yours. What is it? Emma asked, looking completely puzzled. That's the reward money. $200. Emma just stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. But you're the one who took care of them. Noah just gave a little shrug. I wouldn't have even been in that spot if I wasn't there looking out for you. Besides all that, I reckon you needed a whole lot more than I do. Just think of it as a little something for all the trouble you got dragged into because of me. Emma opened her mouth to argue, say no. It just did not sit right. Making a profit from someone's passing, even from men who had tried to end her life. But the sensible part of her knew that this money was a fresh start. It was independence, a chance to get established in this new town without having to rely on the kindness of others. Well, thank you, she finally said, though I surely wish it had come to me a different way. Noah nodded, showing he understood completely. I brought you some supper, he said, changing the topic. He gestured toward a covered tray on the small table, which Emma had not even noticed in her surprise about the reward money. I figured you might be hungry. And right on cue, Emma's stomach growled so loud you could hear it at the mention of food, which made both of them smile. I am starving, she admitted. They shared the simple meal of beef stew, fresh baked bread, and a slice of apple pie, eating in a comfortable silence. When they were finished, a slightly awkward moment passed as they both looked over at the single bed. I can sleep in the chair, Noah said right away, sensing her hesitation. Now that is hardly fair after everything you have done, Emma protested. You need a proper rest just as much as I do. I have slept in much worse places, Noah assured her with a small smile. This chair is a real luxury, compared to some. Emma opened her mouth to argue, but she wasn't quite sure what else she could even suggest. All the proper manners her mama had taught her felt mighty important one second, and then plain silly the next, after everything they had been through. Well, at least take the quilt, she finally managed, pulling it right off the bed and holding it out to him. Noah took it from her with a grateful nod. You ought to get some rest, he told her gently. In the morning, we can sort out what you are going to do next. Hearing that their journey together was pretty much over sent a sudden, sharp ache right through Emma's heart. What in the world was she to do now? Noah had kept his word and brought her all the way to Pueblo safe and sound. He did not owe her another blessed thing. Emma slid under the covers, still chewing on that hard piece of truth, as Noah snuffed out the lamp, throwing the room into near total darkness, except for the slivers of moonlight peeking through the thin, old curtains. She could just barely see the shape of him as he settled down in the chair, pulling the quilt up around his shoulders. Noah, she whispered into the quiet dark. Yes? His voice came back just as soft. Thank you for everything. I reckon I wouldn't have made it out there if it weren't for you. It was quiet for a spell before he finally answered her. You are a whole lot tougher than you think you are, Emma Morgan, but you are mighty welcome all the same. Emma couldn't help but smile, feeling a strange comfort in what he thought of her. Good night, Noah. Good night, Emma. Sleep found her quickly, even with her mind racing a mile a minute. The very last thing Emma remembered was feeling safe for the first time in a long while. Just knowing Noah was close by, she woke up to sunshine pouring through the window and the sounds of a town already up and moving with the morning. For a second there, she was all turned around. Then everything from the past few days came rushing right back to her. Emma sat straight up, her eyes darting to the chair where Noah had slept. It was empty, with the quilt folded up and placed neatly on the seat. A little bit of panic started to creep in. Had he just up and left without so much as a goodbye? Then her eyes landed on a folded note on the table, right next to a steaming cup of coffee. She reached for that little piece of paper, unfolding it to see some strong, clear handwriting. Gone to fetch our horse. Be back round noon. You get some rest. Well now, that was a surprise. A wave of relief washed over Emma, followed right on its heels by a whole heap of confusion. Why on earth should she feel so relieved? It shouldn't matter one bit whether Noah Tanner had left or not. Their deal had been a simple one. He was just meant to get her safely to Pueblo, which he had done, putting his own hide on the line to do it. She had no right to ask anything more of him. And yet, the thought of going on alone in this wild frontier town filled her with a kind of deep loneliness she just hadn't seen coming. Somewhere on that long and dangerous journey, Noah had become more than just the man who saved her. He had become someone she could truly trust, someone whose quiet company she had come to value. She might even be starting to care for him, though she knew such feelings were surely too soon and not very smart. Emma sipped the warm coffee he had left for her, and she was grateful for the small, thoughtful gesture as she took stock of her new life. She had $200, which was a tidy sum that could get her a room and board and keep her going while she looked for a job. But what kind of job could she find? What kind of place could a woman like her make for herself in this rough and tumble town? After that coffee put some life back in her, Emma got herself ready. She pulled on her very last clean dress, a simple little blue thing. It was just cotton, but somehow it had made it through that long journey without getting too torn up. She did her best to fix up her hair, trying to look presentable, even though she did not have much to work with. With that done, she figured she would head on downstairs, hoping to learn about this town, Pueblo, and what it held for her. Now the hotel's little dining room was quiet as a mouse at that time of day, being right between breakfast and lunch. Then a kind-faced, middle-aged woman started walking her way the second Emma stepped inside. "Morning, miss. Can I get you a bite to eat?" the woman asked. Her voice was mighty kind. "Just some tea, please," Emma said softly. "And maybe," she added, "you could tell me a little something, if it is not too much trouble. I am brand new here in Pueblo, and I am just trying to get my feet on the ground." The woman gave a knowing nod. "Well, I would be happy to help with that. Name's Martha Wilson. My husband and we own this here hotel. You are the one who came in with that tall cowboy yesterday, ain't that right? Y'all looked like you had been dragged through a keyhole backwards." Emma's face turned a little red, but she nodded yes, remembering what a terrible sight she must have been. "I'm Emma Morgan. It surely is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Wilson." "Right back at you, dear. Now you just sit yourself right down and I will fetch that tea for you." When Martha came back with that hot cup of tea, she sat down too. Martha sat down across from Emma at the small wooden table. "Now then, what kind of information are you looking for, dear?" "I need to find some work and a more permanent place to stay," Emma explained. "I am not sure what sort of opportunities might be available for a woman here in Pueblo." "Well, that depends on your skills," Martha replied in a matter-of-fact way. "Can you cook, clean, or sew?" "I can do all three, though I would not call myself an expert at any of them," Emma admitted. "I was educated in literature and mathematics by my father, who was a professor back in Boston. I had hoped that perhaps I could find work as a teacher." Martha's eyebrows shot up with interest. "You do not say? Well, that is some mighty fortunate timing. The town council just voted last month to go ahead and build a proper school. We have been using the church for lessons when the circuit preacher is not around, but they are building a real schoolhouse now. It should be all finished up by the end of summer." A little flame of hope sparked in Emma's heart. "Do you know who I should speak with about a teaching position?" "That would have to be Mayor Simmons. He is the head of the town council, has an office right above the bank on Main Street." Martha gave Emma a good long look. "As for a place to stay, Mrs. Everett takes in boarders. Only for respectable widows and single ladies, mind you. Now, it is a little pricey at $4 a week, and that includes your meals, but I promise you it is clean and proper." "Thank you kindly, Mrs. Wilson." You have surely been a tremendous help, Emma said, meaning every word. Martha gave her hand a comforting pat. Happy to help out, dear. It is not easy for a woman all on her lonesome out here in these parts. She paused for a moment, then added, trying to sound casual, now that cowboy who brought you into town, he is not planning on staying on, is he? Then Emma felt a warm blush creep up to her cheeks. Mr. Tanner was kind enough to see me safely to Pueblo after I found myself separated from the folks I was traveling with. We do not have any formal arrangement beyond that. I see, Martha replied, but her tone of voice suggested she saw a whole lot more than Emma was comfortable admitting. Well, he seems like a decent sort of man, not like some of the rough characters we get passing through here. Before Emma could even think of a reply to that, the door to the dining room swung open, and Noah himself walked right on in. It was clear he had paid a visit to the barber. His hair was neatly trimmed and his face was clean-shaven, revealing a strong jawline that his trail stubble had been hiding all this time. He was wearing clean clothes too, a fresh shirt and denim pants that, while they were still work clothes, were a sight better than what he had on before. His dusty, trail-worn clothes. His eyes found Emma right away, and a warm smile spread across his face as he walked on over. Mornin', ma'am, he greeted, tipping his hat politely. Looks like you've already met Mrs. Wilson. Yes, indeed I have, Emma answered, smiling right back at him. She's been a great help, telling me all about how things work here in Pueblo. Just telling her about Mrs. Everett's place and that new school they're fixing to build. Martha chimed in as she got up from her chair. Can I get you some coffee, Mr. Tanner? Why, thank you, ma'am. I'd surely appreciate that, Noah said with a polite nod. After Martha went to go get the coffee, Noah took the chair she'd just left empty. Well, I've found our horse, he said. He made it nearly all the way to town before some fellas caught him. He's down at the livery stable right now, getting a good rest and some decent feed. Oh, I am so glad, Emma said, and she meant it. That horse saved our hides with his speed and his heart. Noah nodded in agreement. So, I hear talk of a teaching job? He asked, since he'd clearly caught the end of her talk with Martha. Now that seems to suit you just fine. If they'll take me, Emma replied, I don't have any of the formal papers, but I can promise you I am well-read and educated. Well, any town would be mighty fortunate to have you. Teaching their children, Noah said, and his voice was so certain that Emma felt a warm blush of pleasure from his confidence in her. Martha came back with Noah's coffee, then, ever so politely, she backed away to give them their privacy. A bit of an awkward quiet settled between them after she left. So what will you do now? Emma finally asked. Are you planning to stay in Pueblo? Noah took a slow sip of his coffee before he gave her an answer. For a few days, at least. Undayi, the sheriff, needs me to give a full statement about Barlow's men for his report to the territorial governor. He paused for a moment, then added, After that, I'm not rightly sure. I've been wandering since the war, never staying in one place too long. Emma nodded her head, trying to push down the heavy, sinking feeling in her stomach that his words caused. Of course he wouldn't stay. Men like Noah Tanner, they didn't put down roots. They moved along with the changing seasons and new opportunities, free as the wind. I should probably go see Mayor Simmons today, she said, needing to change the subject. And Mrs. Everett as well, to arrange a place to stay. I'll walk with you, if you'd like, Noah offered. Pueblo's mostly good people, but a lady on her own can still draw the wrong kind of eyes sometimes. I surely do thank you. Emma accepted, feeling grateful for his protection, but also a little sad knowing it was just for a little while. After they finished their drinks, they headed out together to help Emma get settled on her first day in her new town. Their first stop was the mayor's office, and as luck would have it, they found Mayor Simmons was there and able to meet with them right away. The mayor was a stout fellow with some mighty impressive mutton chop sideburns, and he listened with great interest as Emma told him her story and her wish to be a teacher. Noah stood right there beside her, quiet and supportive, chiming in every now and then with a comment that highlighted just how capable Emma was. Well now, Miss Morgan, your timing is a real blessing, Mayor Simmons declared once she was done speaking. We have been putting the word out for a teacher in Denver and St. Louis, but we have not had much luck. Most of the qualified teachers are a bit hesitant to pack up and move to a frontier town. I can understand why they might hesitate, But I find the idea more exciting than it is scary, Emma replied with honesty. I believe that a good education is the key to a town's future, especially in helping these new places grow. The mayor broke into a wide grin at her answer. Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. The job pays a good $40 a month, with the school year running from September all the way through May. The new schoolhouse ought to be all finished up by late August. Until then, would you be open to holding a few informal lessons for those children whose folks are mighty eager for their learning to keep on through the summer? Oh, I would be just delighted, Emma agreed, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. A real job, and one that was starting right away. Wonderful. I'll tell the town council at our meeting tomorrow night, and assuming they approve, which I am certain they will, you can get started this coming Monday. After stepping out of the mayor's office, Emma felt like she was about to burst with joy. Can you believe it, Noah? A teaching job. Just like that. Noah's smile was so warm as he looked down at her. I told you any town would be mighty lucky to have you. Congratulations, Emma. I am truly happy for you. Their next stop was Mrs. Everett's boarding house, a well-kept two-story home tucked away on a peaceful little side street. The woman who ran the place, a hard-faced widow in her 50s, sized Noah up something fierce, right until Emma explained he was just seeing her settled in, proper-like. I've run a respectable house here, Mrs. Everett told them, her voice as stiff as a board. No gentlemen visitors allowed any higher than the front parlor, and all my boarders have to be back in the house by 9 o'clock. Breakfast is served at 6:30 sharp, dinner is at high noon for anybody who comes back for it, and supper is at 6 on the dot. Now, even with all those strict rules, Emma found the boarding house was clean as a whistle and mighty comfortable with a small but real pleasant room ready and waiting up on the second floor. She went ahead and paid for 2 full weeks right then and there, feeling a wave of relief to have found such a decent and safe place to stay. So when are you fixing to move your things in? Noah asked as they stepped out of the boarding house. Well, I have precious few things to even move, Emma answered back with a little bit of a laugh. It is just what I have in my traveling bag back at the hotel. I reckon I can be moved in by tomorrow. So they spent the rest of that afternoon getting to know the town of Pueblo, with Noah pointing out all the important places she would need to know. The general store for supplies, the town bank, the post office, and even the little church that, for the time being, was pulling double duty as the town schoolhouse. By the time they finally made their way back to the hotel come supper time, Emma felt like she had a pretty good handle on her new home. Over their meal, Emma caught herself just watching Noah, trying to learn by heart the way his eyes crinkled up when he smiled, the low rumble of his voice, and the sure, steady strength in his hands. Tomorrow he would help her get settled at Mrs. Everett's, and after that, he would give his side of the story to the sheriff, perhaps hang around for another day or two, and then ride on out, just like he was meant to. That thought brought a sudden, sharp ache to her heart. In just 4 short days, this man had become so important to her in ways she could hardly even put into words, even to herself. He had saved her life, sure, but it was more than just being grateful. There was a real connection between them that went way beyond them barely knowing each other, a feeling of deep understanding, like they'd known each other before. Emma, Noah's voice gently pulled her from her thoughts. You all right over there? She realized she had just been staring right at him while her mind was a million miles away. Oh, yes, of course, she answered a little too quickly, just thinking about everything that has happened. It has sure been one heck of a journey. It sure has, Noah agreed, and his eyes held hers with a look so strong it made her heart jump, a sight I will not forget anytime soon. The very next morning, Emma gathered up her few belongings and got ready to move over to Mrs. Everett's boarding house. Noah was insistent about walking with her, and he carried her traveling bag even though she told him she was perfectly able to handle it all by herself. Just let me, he said, offering a little smile. I am still not completely sure that Barlow does not have more of his men around who might just happen to recognize you. They walked along in a comfortable quiet through the streets of Pueblo, while the morning sun was already promising it was going to be another hot one. Emma tried her best not to think about how this could be one of the last times they would walk together, and instead, she focused on how exciting it was to have her new job and a new place to stay. Mrs. Everett met them at the front door, her face looking just a little more welcoming than it had been the day before. "Good morning, Miss Morgan. Your room is all ready for you whenever you are." "Thank you kindly, Mrs. Everett," Emma answered politely. "This is mighty kind of you to do." Noah set Emma's traveling bag down just inside the doorway, knowing full well that he was not welcome to come any further into the boarding house. "I reckon I should let you go on and get settled in," he said to Emma. "I am meeting the sheriff around noon." "Do you think I will get to see you later?" Emma asked, and you could hear the little bit of hope in her voice. "I will stop by this evening, if that is all right," Noah answered, taking a quick look at Mrs. Everett for her approval. The older woman just sniffed a little but gave a nod. "Parlor visits are just fine until 8 o'clock, as long as the door stays open." "Thank you, ma'am," Noah said, and he tipped his hat to her before he turned back to Emma. "Until this evening, then." Emma just stood and watched him walk away, a funny feeling of excitement and pure dread mixing up in her heart. Every time they met now felt like it could be the very last one, like a clock was ticking down to a final goodbye that she just was not ready to say. Mrs. Everett led Emma on up to her room, a small, clean space that had a narrow little bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a single chair by the window that looked out onto the street below. It was simple, sure, but it was comfortable. And what was more important, it was a place that Emma could finally call her own, maybe her first real home since her mom and dad had passed. After unpacking the few things she owned, Emma spent the rest of the afternoon planning out lessons. The casual summer classes she was fixing to start come Monday morning. Mayor Simmons had let on that there would likely be about 15 children of all different ages, which was sure to be a handful when it came to teaching them all at the same time. But Emma was ready for the challenge, her mind already buzzing with all sorts of ideas for some fun learning activities. As the evening started to settle in, she found herself getting mighty distracted. Her mind kept wandering right back to Noah. She changed her dress 2 whole times before supper, finally deciding on her blue cotton dress, the one Noah had once said looked so pretty with her eyes. Though he'd said it so casually, she almost wondered if she had made up the whole compliment. Right at 7 o'clock, there was a firm knock at the boarding house door. Emma, who had been making a show of reading in the parlor for the last half hour, tried her best not to look too excited as Mrs. Everett went to see who it was. There stood Noah on the porch, holding his hat in his hands, and looking a little less certain of himself than usual. It was plain to see he had spruced himself up again, with his hair combed just so, and his shirt looking clean and crisp. "Good evening, Mrs. Everett," he said politely to the owner. I've come to pay a call on Miss Morgan, if she is available." "She's right in the parlor," Mrs. Everett replied, stepping aside to let him come on in. "Now remember, the door stays open, and visits have to end at 8. "Yes, ma'am," Noah agreed, all serious-like, though Emma could see a little twinkle of amusement in his eyes as he followed Mrs. Everett down to the parlor. "Miss Morgan, you've got a visitor," Mrs. Everett announced, stating the obvious, before heading back to her sitting room across the hall, where Emma knew for a fact she would be keeping a very watchful eye. "Good evening, Noah," Emma greeted him with a smile, setting her book down. "Please have a seat." Noah took the chair right across from hers and placed his hat on the little table sitting right there between them. "How are you getting settled in?" he asked kindly. "Very well, thank you kindly. My room is mighty comfortable, and I have spent the whole afternoon planning out lessons for my students." Emma paused for a moment, then asked the one question that was really on her mind. "How did your meeting go with the sheriff today?" "It went well enough," I gave my statement. I described the rest of those gang members. "He is sending out telegrams to the neighboring towns to have them be on the lookout." Noah paused for a second, and then he continued. "He also offered me a job." Emma's heart just about stopped. "A job, right here in Pueblo." Noah nodded, said the deputy sheriff has been looking for a fellow with some military experience who knows this territory. The pay is not a whole lot, but it is steady work. "Are you going to consider it?" Emma asked, trying her best to keep her voice even, despite the hope swelling up in her chest. "I am," Noah admitted, his gaze meeting hers. "I never thought much about putting down roots before. I have been drifting since the war, just taking whatever work came my way. But lately I have been thinking, maybe it is time to stop running." "What changed your mind?" Emma asked softly, almost afraid to take a breath. Noah held her gaze steady and true. "I think you know the answer, Emma. That simple statement, spoken plainly but with a whole lot of honesty, made Emma's heart start to race. Was he really saying what she thought he was saying? Could this man, the one who saved her life and had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, possibly feel the same way that she was starting to feel for him? Noah, she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. I know this is sudden, he interrupted. He leaned in just a little bit. Now, we have only known each other for less than a week, but these last few days, he trailed off like he was hunting for the right words. I have never met a soul quite like you, Emma. Your grit, your sheer will, and your good-hearted nature. The way you stood tall through everything that was thrown at you without ever once coming undone. Emma felt a warm blush creep up her neck and onto her cheeks at his words. Well, you make me sound a whole lot grander than I really am, she said with a shy smile. No, Noah said, his voice firm. I surely do not. If anything, I just cannot find the proper words to say just how special you truly are. He drew in a long, steady breath. Look, I am not expecting a single thing from you, Emma, but I just had to let you know that one of the big reasons I am thinking about taking that deputy job is, well, it is the chance to see where something between us might go, if you are of a mind to. Emma's heart felt like it was fixing to beat right out of her chest. I am willing, Rochelle, she said, her voice soft, surprising even herself with how bold she sounded. Very willing. The grin that lit up Noah's face was like the sun peeking out from behind the clouds, all warm and bright and full of promise. He reached his hand across the little table that sat between them, offering it to her. Emma put her hand right in his without a second thought. Hesitation, her heart just fluttering at the gentle strength of his fingers as they closed right around hers. I'll go speak to the sheriff tomorrow, Noah said. I'll tell him I accept the position. They spent the rest of their time together talking about practical matters, like where Noah might find a room in town and when Emma would start her teaching duties. They even discussed how they might handle the social customs of Pueblo society as their own relationship started to grow. But underneath all this sensible talk ran a current of pure joy and anticipation, a shared feeling that something truly special and unexpected had started up right there between them. When the big clock on the mantel chimed 8, Mrs. Everett appeared right on time in the doorway. It is 8 o'clock, Mr. Tanner, she announced, and her tone left no room for any argument. Noah got to his feet right away, respecting the rules of her house. Thank you kindly for your hospitality, Mrs. Everett, he said, ever so polite, before turning back to Emma. May I come call on you again tomorrow, Miss Morgan? I would like that very much indeed, Mr. Tanner, Emma replied, and the formal way they spoke could not hide the warmth in their eyes. Noah gave a slight bow, grabbing his hat from the table. I will see you tomorrow then. Good night, Emma. Good night, Noah, she answered softly, watching him as he followed Mrs. Everett to the front door. After he had left, Emma sat for a few quiet moments in the parlor, her mind spinning with everything that had happened that evening. Just 5 days ago, she had been completely abandoned and alone, facing what felt like certain doom out in the wilderness. Now she had a teaching position, a home, and the start of what just might be the greatest adventure of her life, loving and being loved right back by Noah Tanner. The weeks that followed passed in a happy blur of activity and new feelings for Emma. Her informal summer school started up with 17 children of all different ages, from little 6-year-old Lily Parker, who was just learning how to read, to 15-year-old James Wilson, who needed help with advanced math to help his father out at the family store. The little classroom they made in the church was often hot and crowded, but Emma thrived on the challenge, and she quickly earned the respect of both her students and their parents with her genuine dedication and her clever teaching methods. Well, Noah was a man of his word, and he took that job as deputy sheriff, even found himself a small cabin to live in on the edge of town. His new duties kept him plenty busy, patrolling the streets of Pueblo, sometimes riding out to the ranches nearby to settle disagreements, and every now and then he'd escort prisoners up to Denver for trial. But he always made time each day to see Emma, whether it was walking with her through town, or coming to call at the boarding house in the evenings, or just stopping by the church to see how her classes were coming along. Their courtship moved forward with a mix of being proper and having real feelings, which Emma found was like a breath of fresh air and just so exciting. Noah was always respectful of her being the town's teacher, and he was careful to act in a way that wouldn't harm her good name in the community. But when they were alone, or as alone as they ever could be with Mrs. Everett's watchful eye on them, there was a spark between them you just could not miss, a bond that seemed to get stronger with each day that passed. By the middle of August, as that new schoolhouse was getting close to done, their feelings for one another, each other, was as plain as day to anyone with a lick of sense. Why, Martha Wilson took to giving Emma a little wink whenever she and Noah came to eat at the hotel restaurant. Sheriff Taylor started poking fun at his deputy about how he'd started sprucing himself up and getting his duties done right on time before the evening visiting hours over at the boarding house. Even that stern Miss Everett had seemed to soften up a bit, sometimes even letting them sit on the front porch swing in the evenings, though she always made sure to keep an eye on them right through her front window. Well, on a warm Saturday late in August, Noah asked Emma to a picnic down by the river, after he'd already gotten the all clear from Mrs. Everett beforehand. He pulled up to the boarding house right on the dot at 11, driving a buggy he'd borrowed and looking a little more nervous than usual. "You look mighty pretty," he told Emma as he helped her up into the buggy, and you could see in his eyes how much he liked her light summer dress and the little straw hat that was keeping the sun off her face. "Why, thank you," she answered back, feeling a little flutter in her heart from the way he was looking at her. There was something different about him that day. Today, there was an intensity, a real purpose in his eyes that told her this was not just any ordinary outing. They drove out to a peaceful spot right along the Arkansas River, where the big cottonwood trees offered plenty of shade and privacy from the occasional soul passing by on the nearby road. Noah, well, he had prepared everything just perfectly. A proper picnic blanket was spread out beneath a massive cottonwood, with a basket holding cold chicken, fresh baked bread, some early apples, and even a bottle of that fine lemonade Mrs. Wilson had pitched in for their little trip. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily about their weeks, with Emma talking excitedly about the schoolhouse being almost finished, and Noah sharing his success in tracking down a cattle thief who had been giving the local ranchers a whole lot of trouble. It was comfortable and felt like home, and yet just beneath the surface was a current of anticipation that Emma could not quite name. After they had finished up their meal and packed away all the leftovers, Noah suggested they take a short walk along the riverbank. Emma agreed in a heartbeat, taking the arm he offered as they strolled beneath the dappled shade of the trees. They had gone maybe 100 yards when Noah slowed them to a stop right beside a particularly beautiful bend in the river, where the water pooled up deep and still before it kept on its journey westward. "Emma," he said, turning to look her square in the eye. His whole expression had suddenly turned dead serious. "There is something I need to tell you." Emma's heart started to pound in her chest as she felt the weight and importance of the moment. "Yes, Noah. When I found you standing all alone by that trail, I figured I was just doing what any decent fellow would do, helping somebody who was in trouble. I had no earthly idea that one decision was going to change my entire life." Noah took both of her hands in his blue eyes fixed right on her face. "In just these past few short weeks, you have become more important to me than anyone has ever been. You have made me want things I never even knew what I was missing. A home, a future, a purpose that goes beyond just getting by from one day to the next." Emma felt hot tears start to well up in her eyes at his words, and at the pure, honest feeling in his voice. "I know it has not been very long," Noah went on, "and maybe this is all too soon, but I have never been more sure of a single thing in my entire life." He let go of one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet pouch. From that little pouch, he brought out a simple gold band with a little old sparkling diamond. "Emma Morgan," he said, "would you do me the greatest honor a man could ask for and become my wife?" The tears Emma had been trying to hold back finally came spilling down, making warm trails right down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, and then a little louder. "Yes, Noah Tanner, I will marry you." Noah's whole face just broke into a smile as bright as the summer sun as he slipped the ring right onto her finger. It was a perfect fit, catching the sunlight that was peeking through the leaves above them. "I love you, Emma," he said, pulling her gently into his arms. "More than I could ever find the words to say." "I love you too," she answered, her heart feeling like it might just burst with so much happiness. Their first kiss, when it finally came, was so tender and sweet, like a promise, a new beginning, and a pledge for everything that was to come. Emma felt like she was truly living for the very first time, right there in this good man's arms beside a river in the Colorado wilderness. When they finally pulled back from their kiss, Noah just rested his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes as if saving this very moment in his mind. You know, he said after a little while with a hint of a chuckle in his voice, when I told you that you were coming with me on that very first day, I surely never dreamed where this road was going to take the both of us. Emma let out a soft laugh, pure joy just bubbling up right inside her. From being left all alone to getting engaged in less than a whole month, my aunt would surely be scandalized. Do you have any regrets? Noah asked, pulling back just a bit to look at her face. How fast this all happened, I mean. Not for a single second, Emma answered, and she meant every word of it. Some journeys take a whole lifetime to finish. Others, they just take a single moment of knowing, a real moment of truth. I knew you were somebody special right from the start, Noah Tanner, and every day that's passed has only gone and proved it. They got back to town late in the afternoon, the both of them just glowing with happiness as they went to share their good news. First with Mrs. Everett, Ashfuz Everett, who acted all surprised but couldn't quite hide that happy smile of hers. And then with the sheriff and Mrs. Taylor, who insisted they all have a spur-of-the-moment dinner to celebrate. Well, the news spread like wildfire through Pueblo's tight-knit little community. By Sunday morning, when Emma and Noah went to church together they were met with a whole lot of happy congratulations and well wishes from every which way. Mayor Simmons made a special point to tell Noah that he had roped himself the greatest treasure in the whole territory, while Martha Wilson just wrapped Emma up in a big motherly hug, whispering that she had known from the very moment she saw them together that they were just meant to be. They decided to set the wedding date for October the 12th after the school term was good and started, and just before the winter weather would make travel a real chore for folks coming in from the outlying homesteads. In the weeks leading up to it, Emma split her time between her teaching duties and getting everything ready for the wedding and their new home together. Noah had been working steady to improve the little cabin he was renting, putting in a proper stone fireplace, and making that one big room into two with a brand new wall, and even building their furniture with his own two hands. Emma pitched in with curtains she sewed up in the evenings, and with quilts given by the good ladies of Pueblo, who had taken that young teacher right into their hearts. The wedding day finally came, dawning clear and cool, with the aspens way off in the mountains showing shining in their golden autumn colors. Emma was all dressed up in a new gown of pale blue silk, a little something extra she told herself she deserved for her one and only wedding, with Mrs. Wilson helping to fix her hair and place the small wreath of white flowers that took the place of a veil. "Oh, you look absolutely beautiful, my dear," Martha said, taking a step back to admire all her work. "That young man of yours isn't gonna know what hit him." Emma just smiled, her fingers touching the locket at her throat. It was her mother's, the only piece of jewelry she had on besides her engagement ring. "I sure wish my parents could have been here," she said real soft. "They would have just loved Noah." "Oh, they're watching over you today," Martha promised her, patting her hand. "And they would be so proud of the woman you've become." The little church was filled right up to the brim when Emma walked in on the arm of Sheriff Taylor, who had been kind enough to give her away. And at the altar stood Noah, looking so handsome in his new suit, it was almost unbelievable. His eyes were fixed on Emma with so much love and wonder that her heart felt like it would just burst right there in her chest. The ceremony was simple, but it meant the whole world, with Emma and Noah exchanging the vows they had written themselves for one another. When Noah vowed to cherish and protect her all the days of his life, just as he had since the moment he found her, well, there wasn't a dry eye in the whole church. And when Emma promised to walk right beside him, no matter what paths life took them on, grateful for the day he came into her life, Noah himself had to blink back a few tears. The party that followed lasted well into the evening, with the entire town, it seemed, turning out for the celebration. There was dancing in the street, and tables were piled high with food from every household, and enough good wishes to last them a whole lifetime. As the sun went down and lanterns were lit all around the town square, Noah took Emma's hand and led her toward their waiting buggy, all gussied up with ribbons and flowers by his fellow deputies. They ran through a shower of rice and happy cheers, laughing as they climbed into the buggy that would take them onto their new home and their new life together. And the cabin, when they finally reached it, had been completely transformed. Lanterns hung from the rafters on the porch, casting a warm and welcoming glow right over the entrance. Inside, a fire was crackling in the hearth, sending out a warm welcome, and every little table was filled with bunches of wildflowers and soft candlelight. "Welcome on home, Mrs. Tanner," Noah said, his voice low. He gently lifted Emma right up into his arms to carry her over the threshold, just like they say. Emma wrapped her arms tight around his neck, looking up at the man who was now her husband. "Home," she whispered, and the word felt brand new. "You know, I never figured I'd ever have a real home again after my folks passed on. But a home ain't just the four walls around you, is it? It's the person you get to share it all with." "That's the gospel truth," Noah agreed, setting her down gently on her feet. But he kept his arms wrapped right around her. "And I aim to spend the rest of my days making sure you always feel at home right here with me." The kiss they shared then was deeper and more real than any they'd had before, a sweet promise of the night ahead of them and all the nights that would follow, a true commitment to the life they were going to build side by side. Later that night, as they lay there together in the quiet dark of their little cabin, Emma thought back on the unbelievable journey that had led her right to this very moment. She'd been left with nothing and nobody, but she found more than just a rescue. She found love. More than just safety, she found a real purpose. That journey was a dangerous one, all right, and downright scary at times, but it brought her right here into Noah's arms, to a real home and a community she could call her own, to a future just filled with so much promise. "What's on your mind?" Noah asked, his voice low, his fingers tracing gentle circles on her bare shoulder. "I'm just thinking how being left for dead was the very best thing that ever could have happened to me," Emma said, and she meant every word. "Because that long road led me straight to you." Noah pulled her in closer, and he pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "I thank the good Lord every single day that I found you on that trail," he whispered. "The very moment I said, 'You're coming with me now,' I had no earthly idea I was speaking my own future right into existence." Emma smiled there in the dark, snuggling up against his broad chest, where she could hear the strong, steady beat of his heart. "You know, I reckon we were always meant to find each other out here," she said softly. "All that heartache, all that pain, and all those long, hard journeys that brought us to that one moment, they were all just pointing the way home." "Home," Noah repeated, his voice warm and full of pure contentment. "Long as it's with you." As they started to drift off to sleep in each other's arms, Emma felt a certainty deep in her soul that no matter what trials lay ahead of them, their life in these territories was going to be a good one. They would face them all together with that same grit and determination that had seen them through their first dangerous journey. She went from abandoned to beloved, from lost to found, and from being all alone to forever connected. Emma's heart was just plumb full, knowing that she had found more than just a husband, but a real true partner for all the adventures yet to come. Now, in the years that followed, the story of Emma Morgan and Noah Tanner became something of a legend there in Pueblo. Folks would tell how she had been left behind by a wagon train, just abandoned to a terrible fate in the wilderness. They'd talk about how he had found her, a lone cowboy with his own heavy past, and said those now famous words, "You'll go with me now." And they'd recall how they ran from outlaws, stared down danger together, and somehow fell in love against all the odds. Their life together, well, it was rich with both hard times and happy days. Emma's little schoolhouse flourished under her watch, eventually growing so big it had to hire 2 more teachers. And as Pueblo grew, Noah rose from deputy to the town sheriff when Taylor finally retired, earning the respect of the whole territory for his fair and steady hand with the law. And sure enough, their little family started to grow. First came their son, a little fellow they named James after Noah's own daddy. He arrived just a year after they tied the knot. He was followed 2 years later by their sweet Sarah, who had her mama's golden hair and her daddy's stubborn spirit. Then came their youngest, Michael, who made their family complete 3 years after that. He was a quiet, thoughtful boy who had his father's knack for noticing things and his mother's love for a good book. Through thick and thin, the hard winters and the bone-dry summers, the ups and downs of money as the railroad finally came chugging through, and the slow taming of that wild land into something a bit more settled. Well, Emma and Noah always had each other's backs. They were partners and the best of friends. Their love, which was born in a time of danger and raised on a shared dream, well, it just got deeper and stronger with every passing year. Now, on their 25th wedding anniversary, with their kids all grown up and the town changed from a rough frontier outpost to a bustling little community, Noah went and surprised Emma with a special trip. Not by horse this time, mind you, but on that newfangled train that now ran from Pueblo all the way to Denver and even further on. He took his darling Emma to a fancy hotel right in Denver, where they ate a fine dinner and danced the night away, celebrating all their years together. Did you ever imagine that day you found me all alone on that trail? That we would end up here, 25 whole years later? Emma asked as they swayed close on the dance floor, her head resting just so on his shoulder, and Noah's arms held her just a little tighter. Not in my wildest dreams, he told her with a soft smile. I was just trying to do the right thing is all. I had no idea I was finding the place my heart belonged. You'll go with me now, Emma quoted softly, a sweet smile on her face from the memory. Best words I ever did hear. Best decision I ever made. Noah corrected her gently, bending down to kiss her softly. And it's one I'd make all over again, every single day for the rest of my life. And as they kept on dancing, surrounded by all the glittering lights of a fancy Denver ballroom, a whole world away from their humble beginnings, Emma thought to herself that sometimes getting left behind ain't at the end of the journey, but the real beginning of a much greater one. From that one lonely moment of being abandoned, a whole lifetime of love had bloomed, a family, a community, and something special that would surely last long after they were gone. Being left behind had led her exactly where she was meant to be. She was right where she was always meant to be, in the arms of the man who had found her, the one who truly saved her and loved her with his whole entire heart. And for that beautiful, unexpected blessing, Emma Morgan Tanner knew she would be forever and always grateful.